Welcome to Ear Biscuits, the podcast where two lifelong friends talk about life for a long time. I'm Link.
And I'm Rhett. This week at the round table of dim lighting, we are talking about our top 12 creative influences. We've done top 10 episodes where it's like top 10 favorite films or top 10 favorite whatever. We
Game
done top
shows,
10s.
television shows.
We've had this one on the list of things to do for a while, but I think we've both been a little bit intimidated, and the process by which I kind of got into this only confirmed my intimidation. So much so that literally 10 minutes ago, I was like, dude, we got to make this 12 because I just feel like I'm selling people short. I don't know how I feel about the 12. I don't know how I feel about the order. I feel
well, you know
almost
what,
creatively crippled right now.
You know what? Hey, let's take a deep breath and let's shed that. This is just a construct for us to have a conversation about
this is good.
The people that we believe
put me in the right frame of mind.
They've entered our psyche. They've become they've impacted us to various degrees that then it has made its way into it's permeated us to then come out in our own creativity. And it's quite an exercise to connect those dots. But let's just say these are not definitive lists. Let's also say that I know that I forgot people.
Oh yeah,
but none of them are listening.
And part of that's gonna probably come when you've got somebody on your list, and I'm like, oh,
hopefully,
dang.
we don't know each other's list.
I've got 15 honorable mentions that I'll mention at the end.
We have not
just in case
seen each other's list. We're gonna alternate starting with 12. I'll go with 12.
And we're gonna do the traditional method, which is because I'm assuming there's some crossover that if a person says my number 12 is blankety blank, and and then the other guy's like, my number 2 is blankety blank.
The
person who's higher goes first in talking about it.
Oh.
The person who ranks that person higher gets to talk about them first.
But now, they have to talk about them earlier than they were ready to.
Right, so it's a little bit of a compromise. So you have to do something you don't want to do.
And I'll say that more so than other lists, and it's always been tough, that the actual ranking is much more arbitrary.
The ranking could be upside down, as far as I'm concerned.
Really all the way to the top, because
yeah.
How do you measure these things?
It's how you evaluate it, which we can get into. I think we'll get into those specifics as we roll these people out.
Yeah, there's a difference between inspiration and influence, too.
Yeah, right.
And so depending on the person, sometimes there's a direct connection with something that I experienced or learned from a person that then directly impacted something from our career. Other times, it's just kind of the idea of their approach or the way that it made me feel, or it's much more nebulous in general. So it's kind of all over the place.
Last thing I'll say,
that's true of creativity.
Yeah, well, last thing I'll say before we break into the list is that this is not an uncommon question in interviews, like who are your biggest creative influences? And I think that we've always had this, or I feel like I've had this, I don't want to speak for you, I've had this sense that like, I'm not formally trained in anything. I went to Harnett County Public Schools. I didn't do anything creative in training. I went to engineering school. I've always get this weird feeling and super high imposter syndrome when you start talking about creative influences because I don't have a creative background. I've just lived and breathed creativity my entire life. And so I don't know what to say in those situations, but when I really dug down and started going back to the beginning of like, when did you start thinking about creative things? I started realizing that there's a lot of people who have influenced me. Like, no, and I don't want to say like, oh, I don't have influences. I'm just saying that I get intimidated by the question.
Yeah.
And then even when we said we were gonna do 10, I was saying maybe we should do 5. And now I've talked you into doing 12 and I've got 15 honorable mentions. It's just, this is a weird process. I'm excited to talk about it.
I do not want you to mention your honorable mentions because they may be on my list.
No. If you say somebody who's on my honorable mentions, only at that point will I be like, they made my honorable mention. I'm not going to say that until to the end.
Whenever I would get that question of creative influences, because it's so hard to nail it down and without a prepared answer or doing the exercise that we've only started to do for this episode, I would fall back on, I'm not a student of a lot of the things we do. A lot of what we do is kind of like we're among the group of people that invented it, honestly.
Yeah.
So there hasn't been people in like the world of creatordom, if you could call it, to emulate that went ahead of us.
Right.
Because it didn't exist ahead of us. So if you look at it that way, and I always thought of that as an asset. It's like, okay, this sets us up to be more original and more ourselves, and people can emulate us if they want to. But really, I think part of it was just being intimidated by the work that we started to do. Who wants to start? You want to start with number 12?
Sure. I'm going to start. I put this person at number 12 because I felt like putting them at any number was weird. And they either had to be at number 12 or number 1, and I put them at number 12 because you like to understand. My dad. Okay? So I just started with
Jimmy.
My dad as a creative influence. Now, I've said this quite a bit about how
I totally get it.
My sense of humor is largely informed by the way my dad's sense of humor is. And the things that he thinks are funny and the way that he interjects himself into a conversation, the way that once he sort of has an audience, the way that he would begin to entertain that audience. I've said forever that if I wasn't a comedian, I would be a professor. Well, that's what my dad was for his entire life, basically, starting in like 1980.
So he had an audience.
He had an audience every single day.
My observation, because I definitely think he's also a comedic influence on me. Like I can, even to this day, if you'll make a joke and I'll be like, that's a Jimmy joke.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, if it's dry and a little, let's see, how do you describe it? It's
dry.
Like not derogatory or judgy, but it's observational, and sometimes it might be kind of like in good spirits making fun of something or somebody. There's a bit of that.
And there's a confidence in it.
There's a confidence
in
his swagger
in his humor.
He was good in small groups. Like, I mean, a classroom is an awkward size if you're I've never been a stand-up comedian, but if you are, it's like when you're speaking to a big room or an arena even, when you go bigger, it's a different thing. But when a room gets too small, it's like you're talking to people in like a doctor's waiting room. It's like, that's intimidating. Like for us to be behind the desk on GMM and to know that there's 1 million people watching every day, you just kind of get over it. First of all, they're not there. There's just a lens. But second of all, that's different than even my experience now. If I'm in like a hangout and like you're telling a story and then all of a sudden it's just like the 8 people are listening to your story, that's a different vibe. It kind of puts you in a different spot. But your dad is good in those situations.
He is good, but I think the thing that I've really taken from him is that, because I'm not very comfortable in those sort of small and medium-sized groups. Now I can be, and I can then go into but I have to kind of shift from.
It's a mindset.
Personal Rhett to entertainer Rhett.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people might think, oh, I bet you when Rhett and Link are hanging out with their friends, they're just funny. It's not true. It's just not true. Partly because it's a profession in some sense.
Yeah.
But there's also a power dynamic that comes with being recognized as the person who's currently has the power to speak to a crowd. So a professor has that, a comedian has that, they have the microphone.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at my best, is when I have that power. Yeah, that makes, I'm not in a negative sense, but when it's just like, all right, monkey dance, that's when I do well. But if it's just like, everybody's just kind of being personal in this situation, and now you're gonna say something funny. You're right, my dad is really good at that.
He good with the quips. He wasn't as much of a storyteller, or there's all types of genres.
He does have some really funny stories.
He's got some funny stories. Well, I haven't heard as much of those. It's more of like the one-liners. Someone else is talking and then he'll lean over and say something to you like give you a little private commentary.
And he also has things like, if you're like, I don't remember exactly what he said, but I'll paraphrase. Like getting on an elevator at a tourist attraction, like, okay, 15 people get on an elevator to go to the top of the Empire State Building or whatever, right? And so you're with a bunch of strangers and no one talks, right? So like 1 minute into an elevator ride, my dad will be like, so how's everybody doing today? You know, it's like he'll do something to break the ice when he senses that there's an awkward situation.
But he's not one of those, some people may do that because they're friendly and they're outgoing. He's doing it because the choice to do it is funny.
Oh yeah, definitely. But he is friendly and outgoing,
he's
but that's
friendly,
not why.
But the main reason he's doing it is because doing this now is funny.
So as I think about just obviously genetic influences, but also environmental influences in the way that and the things that I think are funny is so largely influenced by him genetically and the way that he behaved growing up that I got to put him on the list. And it probably makes sense for him to be number one since it's like 50% of my DNA, but it's like I just put him on the list.
He's your dad.
On the list.
He influenced you in a lot of ways.
He's not an entertainer.
But like the comedy, it was just, it sprinkles in and it comes out occasionally. Like if you say, if one of us is gonna be the one to make the dry quip, it's absolutely gonna be you, and you can trace that to your dad. The one-liner, and your dad didn't raise an eyebrow, but he kind of, it was that same effect. Yeah. My number 12, I'm hoping to surprise you with this one, with a, oh yes, because that's how I felt when I actually thought of this one. Ross McElwee.
Ross McElwee.
Oh, you put him on your list?
Number 5 for me.
Are you? Oh man, I thought you would have forgotten him entirely.
I got you. Not only is Ross McElwee my number 5, but my rec today comes from Ross McElwee.
Okay. Well, let me help you out with just kind of giving some background on the guy. He's a documentary filmmaker from the 80s and on. He was first famous for Sherman's March. The longer title is Sherman's March, a meditation on the possibility of romantic love in the South during an era of nuclear weapons proliferation.
You're really stealing my thunder. That's my rec, man.
Well, I have to give him context for who this guy is. He also released an autobiographical documentary in 1993 called Time Indefinite. But so I'll let you, why did you put him so high? Because I could have put him there too. Set the scene.
When we watched that first film, Sherman's March, I remember thinking.
Well, where were we? Do you remember when in our life we were watching it?
It was like right after college?
It was, I'm pretty sure it was in context of starting to make our own documentary Looking for Miss Locklear.
I think it was the thing that led us to do it.
Definitely.
But I don't think we made the decision to do it and then watched it. We kept referring
back to it.
Well, so
because we were getting into documentary films.
The thing that we like so much, that I really connected with so much about this guy, is that he made documentaries that were incredibly vulnerable, personally vulnerable. They were really a personal exercise in.
Right.
It was self-exploration and self-discovery through the lens of other people, right? And so
he was the main character in his documentary.
I call self-insertion, documentary, which is not a great term. Which again is exactly what we did with Looking for Miss Locklear way back in the day.
Yeah. Also think Super Size Me.
Yeah. The thing that I love so much about it is I'm really drawn towards documentary film where the thing that's on display is the people first, not a subject or an agenda or a cause. Now I like political documentaries. I like documentaries that all of a sudden change the way that you think about the environment. I like those.
Humanity on display, I totally agree.
But it's about the people, and that's why I didn't put Errol Morris on my list. He was an honorable mention. I love Errol Morris for the same exact reason, but Ross McElwee is the one that we first connected with. And then the way that
he's from North Carolina.
Yeah, it was so relatable.
There was another film, Bright Leaves, which is about his connection to like his family's connection to the tobacco industry in North Carolina. So we had this connection, and we definitely were referring to it and were actively inspired by what he did in 1986 and on, when we were in 2003 making Looking for Miss Locklear.
And not just Looking for Miss Locklear, but I would say the entire Commercial Kings series, all of our I Love Local commercials, it was based on that same principle. If we just love people, and we love people who've never been on camera, are not prepared to be on camera. And actually, one of the things that I am most sort of creatively restless about over the past 10 years has been the fact that we haven't been able to get back to that.
Yeah, I'll go one step further than just Commercial Kings and say, again, that it was 2003 when we were filming Looking for Miss Locklear. It didn't come out till 2006.
Yeah.
So this is like pre-YouTube, pre-vlogging, really taking hold in any meaningful way. So the fact that he was autobiographical, vulnerable, it was putting his story out there, but he was the guy controlling the camera. He would set the camera down, then he would walk out and he would be in front of it, and there would be different scenes that he would set up. We emulated that directly in Looking for Miss Locklear. But it's a vlog precursor, in a lot of ways. And it was, so it was more artistic, and even though we were very late and hesitant to vlogging, we had this seed planted from this era in our creativity that gave us an appetite to connect directly with our audience and not just create things for an audience to enjoy separate from us. Yeah. So I that's why I think he's so important.
But not as important as I thought he was. No. Yeah. Again, it was I just put him on. I had to put him somewhere.
All right. What's your 11?
My 11 is, maybe this will surprise you, C.S. Lewis.
Okay. I get it. For you, especially.
I'll keep this one relatively short. So C.S. Lewis, of course, famously known. He's famously known as like a Christian theologian and an author. But the thing that I really connected with him about was the Chronicles of Narnia, which not a huge fan of the movies. Let me just say that. I'm definitely a Lord of the Rings guy when it comes to the movies. And ultimately in adulthood, the books of Lord of the Rings. But
it's crazy that they were like really
close
contemporaries.
Friends. Yeah.
J.R.R. Tolkien.
I've been to the bar next to Oxford where they would hang out.
You told me.
So the thing about C.S. Lewis is it's the first fantasy literature that I ever read. And it's so approachable. It's so easy to read it as like a 8, 9, 10-year-old. And I consumed the Chronicles of Narnia voraciously at like the age of 10 and just fell in love with these stories. I mean, you can read,
it was your Harry Potter.
You can read them.
There wasn't a Harry Potter.
And you can also read them in like a couple of nights. They're so much shorter. And the thing that I love about the Chronicles of Narnia is it starts in the real world, and this is true of much fantasy, but it starts in the real world, and then there is a wardrobe that gets you into a fantasy world. And that is a concept that I've never been, it's like it went into my soul and connected with me on this cosmic level. And I am so intrigued by any story that follows this convention. We're starting in the real world, and there is a pathway to another place. Any movie that does that and does it well, I'm all in the whole time, right? It's one of the reasons that I don't think that my soul connects.
I don't know why the first thing I thought about was being John Malkovich, but go ahead.
But it's also I like secret rooms, and it's the reason that we put that weird locker in the first season of Buddy System. It's like, oh, what if we opened a locker and had a secret bike in there? I love that convention and love to put it in things, but
also our novel, The Lost Causes of Bleak Creek.
Yeah.
I mean, you go.
Same thing, yeah.
You've absolutely got that in the creek.
And so that way of thinking about the world and way of thinking about
portals,
taking what is possible or taking what is impossible and bringing it into the possible sort of tangible world is something that it permeates the way that I think about story. And that comes from C.S. Lewis. I mean, that was the first, it was in me already, right? But he's the one who brought it out, and it was like, oh, there's a whole world, there's a whole life, there's all these possibilities that exist in this world that you can get through. And as a kid, many, many times, I would be walking through the woods and I would see like a tree that had like a hole in it, and I would be like, okay, is that my Narnia? And I would pray, God, if this is Narnia, let me in. Like, I wanted to be in it so bad.
Pray to God.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because, that was my way of thinking.
You pray to Aslan.
And so, C.S. Lewis. I don't want to say anything else because we got a lot to get through.
My number 11, can I surprise you with this one? Robert Rodriguez.
Okay. He was on the list and I knocked him off.
Okay.
He's an honorable mention.
All right, whatever.
That was tough.
Robert Rodriguez, film director, producer, early films are Desperado, Antonio Banderas, and Salma Hayek. Really good movie. Super cool. Yeah. From Dusk Till Dawn, Spy Kids, Sin City. I mean, he's even, I hesitate to mention, he directed many episodes of the Book of Boba Fett. One episode of The Mandalorian, because of his Robert Rodriguez take on like the Western gunslinger vibe, made him a great choice for that, even though he's getting a lot of backlash for the Book of Boba Fett being kind of tepid. I'm not gonna go there. But back in 1992, his first film called El Mariachi was just a homemade Western, but like a gangster Western. Like a guy was carrying a guitar case with am I getting this confused with Desperado? He had a guitar case.
No, that's Mariachi.
That then he opened it up and it had this, it had a gun in it. Yeah. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but we discovered him in the context of Quentin Tarantino, who maybe is on your list, but I actually replaced Tarantino with Robert Rodriguez on my list because he wrote a book in 1995,
Rebel Without a Cause?
Which we read, Rebel Without a Crew.
Rebel Without a Crew.
And he basically chronicled making El Mariachi. I mean, it has this really homemade feel to it.
Yeah.
But he shot it on film and he did it all himself. He did not have a crew. And he didn't even have actors. He had these friends and acquaintances and pulling favors to make this epic, super, super cool vibe, violent movie that you could tell he made it himself, but the conception and the creativity involved in it just, it overrode the homemade nature of it. And you could definitely tell this guy was a tremendous talent.
Yeah.
And given the landscape of entertainment at the time, I believe he got a lot of attention, if not won awards at Sundance. I don't know the details.
Yeah, that book was transformational for us. Again, he was on the list, and
And again, it was 1995, 1996. We're in high school. We're talking about going to film school.
I didn't read it when it came out. I remember.
You don't think we read it in high school?
I read that. I remember reading that after college.
After college?
That's when I read it. So you may have read it earlier. I read it after. I just remember reading that book and thinking, first of all, we've always been if we've got an idea, we're gonna find a way to make it happen. And when you connect with people who think the same way. And we always felt like outsiders.
He scrapped everything together.
We weren't living in Hollywood. We weren't doing the traditional thing of becoming a PA and working your way up and then being the director one day. We were just a couple of guys in North Carolina, and then you see this guy who's writing about, just do it. Just make it. If you want to make it happen, make it happen. And there's a couple of principles in that book that really stuck with me. The one that we repeat time and time again is whenever you're working on a project, and a film is the most applicable one, but after you get the footage, cut the trailer first.
Oh yeah, that's where we got that.
Once you've cut the footage, or once you've gathered the footage, cut the trailer first, because the trailer gives you this vision that you can look forward to. You create a trailer that has the vibe that you want the film to have, and it gives you this, true north to look at, because you're going to lose heart, real. Especially if you're doing it all on your own. I mean, this dude was scoring his own films as well. He was literally doing the score to everything back in the day.
Yeah. So we did that for Looking for Miss Locklear, and then you also can show that trailer to people, and they get excited, and it helps you.
It's a way to get financing.
Keep going.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot to learn there from that book. We took a lot of inspiration, but it was, once we were making our documentary, we were filmmakers. We were filmmakers.
Yeah.
We entered it in film festivals. We won some awards.
Got shown on PBS, man.
Got shown on PBS in South Carolina.
Hey, I'll take it. I'll take
the underbelly of North Carolina.
I'll take a Carolina.
Yeah, but we could apply that label to ourselves, and we could say we've done it and we're doing it. This is.
Yeah.
I mean, we were on staff with Campus Crusade still at the time. We were also that, but it's like, hey, we have a film, so we are filmmakers. We are achieving the dream, and he gave us the confidence to do that.
Yeah.
And Daniel, the Smosh CEO, his previous job was working very closely with Robert, and so maybe we'll have an opportunity to meet him.
I'm sure we could.
Sometime in the future.
He was working at El Rey.
Be great to shake his hand. Tell him thank you.
Okay, we've got 10 more each, but first.
Oh, this is.
What are we promoting right now, Daniel? I can't remember. Yeah, okay.
We still want people to listen to Trevor's podcast?
Yeah. We're
what
still
if they're
going to
listen to his podcast instead of our podcast?
I mean,
what if they get hooked on
I don't care.
And then they don't have room for two?
That'd be fine.
That is fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's
you
still
might
a mythical
like Trevor
podcast.
Better than us.
Yeah.
And if you do, there ain't
That's
nothing
a
wrong
good
with
thing.
that.
That's a good thing.
Trevor Talks Too Much. Check it out. It's also on YouTube, so you can listen to it with your eyes. Trevor Talks Too Much. We need to pick up our pace.
Yeah. I'm going to move through a couple. I'm going to move through this one pretty fast. Number 10, Dolly Parton.
My number 10 is Dolly Parton.
Hey, we're all happy.
And we only did this because of Jenna. And Jenna's in the, no, we didn't. But she might be your number one. I don't know. Is she going to be on your list, Jenna? She's okay. Jenna's number one. Yeah, and the numbers are arbitrary. So we're neck and neck here.
Yeah,
go ahead.
And okay, so I don't consider myself a longtime Dolly Parton fan in terms of, when I was listening to Merle back in the day, even when I heard that he had written some songs about her, like Always Wanting You is supposedly written about her. Always wanting you, but never having you.
Yeah, he had a big crush on her.
I always was, when I would hear a Dolly Parton song, I would be like, oh, that's a great song. And I was obviously attracted to her. But it wasn't actually until Dolly Parton's America, the podcast, was that a Radiolab production? Is that what that was? That was probably last year or the year before, and it's just an incredible podcast. And I began to really understand how much of her story I identify with. Now, I don't come from the mountains of Tennessee, but I come from the plains of North Carolina. And the idea of being someone who, because of where you're from, there's not a lot expected of you, and you kind of feel like every time you come into a room, you are bringing that expectation with you. Now, she exemplifies that in a huge way, because people thought that, oh, this is this little country bumpkin. And she was like, no, I'm not just some country bumpkin. I'm an incredible musician. I'm an incredible songwriter. And I'm an incredible businesswoman. And I'm going to have an amusement park. And I'm going to have this place where you can eat while people are on horseback. And not just that, but she is an incredible humanitarian who has found a way to be very vocal about marginalized people and very inclusive as a personal brand without alienating, which is very difficult to do. She's alienated a number of people on the right at this point just because she's standing up for marginalized people. But she's found a way to maintain a very broad audience in a way that is unifying people in what can be is super divisive right now, right?
Yeah, and we seek to do that. I mean, to sum it up, it's a brand ethos built around her true self. You know, so I think that's how I summarize the creative inspiration. Number 9 for me is iJustine.
Oh wow.
Yeah. You know,
I have a creator on my list. It's not iJustine. Okay.
We're of course we're friends with Justine. We're not in constant contact, but you know, we'll go a long time without talking.
But she was probably sponsored by Constant Contact at some point.
Yeah, that's true.
And so were we.
You know, we came up together on the internet, but she was ahead of us.
Yep.
And I think she was tremendously influential in that she embraced cutting edge technology to set herself apart. And we noticed that. Mm-hmm. You know, it was when this website, Justin TV, started making it possible for you to live stream.
Yeah. She
was one of the first people to say, I'm gonna live stream my life 24/7. Mm-hmm. I don't know how long she did it, but it was, I mean, it was at least
a year.
It was at least weeks. Somewhere between weeks and years. Okay. I don't remember that part. But I remember watching her go about her life as a student of what we were coining the phrase as internetainment. It's like, okay, is this even possible? Is this a good idea? We didn't know the answer. We found it out by watching her. She didn't know the answer. She found out by doing it.
Yeah.
And she set herself apart. She got that edge by being on the cutting edge, and it was something that we adopted as a strategy. Mm-hmm. And I think that directly led to us doing the Rhett and Link cast live. So
pretty definitely.
We partnered with Ustream. She was also on Ustream, and we did a live internet broadcast every Thursday night from our basement studio in Lillington.
Which is the precursor to GMM.
Yeah, that is what became Good Mythical Morning. We talk a lot about Good Morning Chia Lincoln as being the precursor to Good Mythical Morning.
But 2 guys at one desk and one microphone, that was Rhett and Link cast.
Absolutely.
That's where it started as a genre.
And it was
for us.
It was live for an hour for an entire year. And those archives live exclusively on the Mythical Society. Weekly. If you want to see them. Yeah. They're on the Mythical Society. But that's where we
compared notes too.
We developed our chops of the conversation that are reflected in what we're doing right now, what we do on Good Mythical Morning behind the desk every day.
And we didn't have a lot of people to compare notes with at the time.
Right.
And she was one of the few that was, that we reached out to and talked to and learned a lot from. I've created her on my list as well for similar reasons, a little higher up.
Okay.
Number 9 for me, Jordan Peele.
Yes.
So it's interesting. Jordan is a huge influence on 2 levels.
Yeah.
The first is just very simply before he was the Jordan Peele that you know, when he was just the Jordan Peele of Key and Peele, right?
Which you also knew.
Yeah. And
it's arguably just as visible.
So I think there's 3 aspects that I'll quickly cover. The first is the fact that just, as a sketch comedian, somebody making sketch that was connecting on the internet in a huge way, both Key and Peele, huge inspirations for us. We could only hope to get to be a fraction as funny as they are in their sketches. And even getting to a fraction of that would be an accomplishment. The second thing, of course, is what he has accomplished as a filmmaker, which is just bringing comedy and horror together, horror, comedy, and social commentary together in a way that's not cheesy at all. No one is doing it. People are trying to emulate it. No one has emulated it yet.
And when he first did it, it floored you.
Yeah.
Because it was so good right out of the gate. And it was like, this
guy's been sitting on this the whole time?
Yeah.
Which is the third thing, and for me, the most significant thing is the transition from a sketch comedian to a powerhouse filmmaker.
And producer.
In being in this town for the past 11, going on 12 years, by the time this comes out, I think we'll have been in LA for 12 years. and it'll be our 12th anniversary here.
Mm-hmm.
Being here for 12 years and being someone who is primarily recognized as a YouTube person, a YouTuber, a YouTube sensation, you bring that into every room, you bring that into every meeting, and it's not a plus. It's not a plus in this town to be a YouTube sensation.
Right.
You come in with a bunch of baggage that then you have to unpack and explain who you aren't and what you are capable of creatively. And listen, we've been able to do so many awesome things, and I'm very creatively fulfilled, but a lot of the things that I really want us to be able to do, the fact that we have a YouTube presence is actually, it works for you in getting you in the room, but works against you once you're in the room.
I think it's true of entertainers in general. That
they put you in boxes.
You put you in a box, no matter what that box is, it's really hard to get out of.
And the fact that he got out of that box in such a decisive
and such an Oscar-worthy
way.
Yeah.
That's not gonna happen with us, okay? I'll just go ahead and break the news in case you want to believe that. We're not gonna just suddenly make a movie that is going to blow the world away and win a bunch of Oscars. I mean, I would hope, and that's what we aspire to, but chances are that's not gonna happen. But just being able to make that transition in the way that he did is so inspirational, almost intimidatingly inspirational.
All right. I could have put him on my list. Number 8, I'm gonna go back. I think I'm gonna steal your thunder here because I'm gonna stay in the world of entertainment. And I'm gonna say the Vlog Brothers, John and Hank Green.
My number 8. Hold on, is this your number 8?
It's my number 8.
Okay, my number 8 is Hank and John as well.
So there we go.
You go first, because
Dolly.
I just talked.
You know, they're friends of us. They know of ours. They know how much we respect them, and it's flattering that they also respect us. Again, with no one to go ahead of any of us, it's you cling to the people who are holding on for dear life and trying to build an outpost on the frontier of what's becoming the future of entertainment.
Yeah.
And for them to have a similar relationship as brothers,
Mm-hmm.
You know, we watched them closely before we knew them. They weren't in the same room together usually.
Yeah.
But they had a connection that was on display that then they very overtly fostered into a community of they named their fans the Nerd Fighters. They developed an identity that was bigger than the two of them, that they participated in like a technical digital community of forums and interactions through a tool called Ning at the time. We're just gonna do what they did. We're gonna create a Ning community. We're gonna name our fans. Yeah. We're gonna empower them to name themselves.
But we're gonna suggest Mythical Beast.
Right, and then we're gonna choose that one together. Yeah, so the Mythical Beasts moniker was a direct emulation of their Nerdfighteria, which then that becomes the name of our company. Yep. And so the branding shifting beyond the two of us is something that we got from them.
And also how entrepreneurial they are.
Yeah.
And it's like starting VidCon and like
there was no endeavor
they're always
that was off
something.
Limits.
And and then John and now Hank having this sort of talent wrapped up in being able to write that they're kind of sitting on as well, and then unleashing that in the world in a really significant way that they're being recognized for their accomplishments, not because they had a YouTube channel, but because they're genuinely talented at writing, And again, that's inspirational to me as well. Number 7.
Mm-hmm.
I feel bad putting this man on the list in a place that isn't of preeminence, but Merle Haggard is my number 7. Now,
my number 7 is Merle Haggard.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I guess we're thinking the same thing.
It's crazy how this ended up happening.
And there's, okay, I'll let you couch this one because there's different this is a tough one.
Well, I'll just be honest with you. There was a point in which Merle was not on the list because when I was thinking about him, I was like,
we're not country music artists.
I absolutely love his music, but from his creative influence, what kind of creative influences he had? Is that how I think about Merle? Or I just think about this guy that I love the way he does what he does. But then I started realizing, oh no, like I've sung, we talked about it. We were recently on a ski trip together with our boys. We were coming back down. We were actually, as we were going up there, I think. No, coming back down, we listened to Merle, a playlist that you put together.
Yeah.
Which I asked you to share with me, and you still haven't shared with me, by the way.
Yeah, I wanted you to ask me again.
But it's basically the best Merle throughout the years, which we pretty much agree exactly on what that is. And I'm not a guy who makes playlists, and so I need you to make them for me so I can then enjoy them.
Yeah.
But in listening to that playlist, one of the things you said was, this stuff is just we listen to this so much because we grew up in a different era. We grew up in a time where you had tapes, and it was the tapes that you had that you played.
Yep.
And so it was like building 10 Spotify playlists and never departing from them for like a 10-year period. If you were to do that, you think about a way that music and the person behind that music would seep into your bones.
You couldn't even shuffle it.
And, yeah, right. And so first of all, the way that we sing is heavily influenced by Merle Haggard. The way we think about melody is heavily influenced by Merle Haggard. And so music is a big part of what we do and has been even a bigger part of what we do in the past. So it isn't that there's something that Merle has done. This is more of the indirect influence sort of thing that like you're around somebody and it seeps into and you know that it's influencing the way you go about things.
I think I can make it a little more direct. I think that we would pick songs of his and we would dissect them. I think there was like an art appreciation aspect to, we would sit in the car, we would pick it apart and appreciate parts of it. So we never had like art appreciation classes to really understand the value of how art can move you. It just wasn't an emphasis of ours in high school. But it was something that we found ourselves doing impromptu through his music. And we would marvel at the subject matters that he would choose to, the pictures he would paint. And how we would say things like, there's nobody else writing songs like this on the radio. There was an innovation in our minds. It was unique.
And the choices that he was making, the thing that we talk about a lot is
it was self-expression.
Well, in the way that
different.
In the way that he brought, like when he gets into the late 70s, early 80s, which is our favorite era. And I'm beginning to say era instead of era. Just
okay. You sound, I guess,
just
smarter.
Because era sounds like you might be saying error.
Era.
So
okay.
Era.
Do
just
it.
so you know.
All right.
I think it's like the official New York Times pronunciation. I don't know.
How did Merle say it?
Era.
No, he didn't.
So the thing that he was doing at the time is the choices he was making musically with instrumentation, the fact that he was like bringing in this jazz influence out of nowhere and all of a sudden there was a saxophone in country music and no one was doing that kind of thing. It wasn't like when you listen to music and you're just like, I just like the way this makes me feel and this is just a cool vibe. It was that, but then it was just like, oh man, this was an exercise in curation when he was making these songs, the way that he brought these specific people together to make this specific sound. And you just the other day when we were listening to that playlist, I was just reminded, I'm like, no one has done this.
The singularity of
the way
his
that
voice
he has done it.
And how we could study its development helped us understand the identity of an artist.
Yeah.
You know what? I want to take an aside in on the ski trip coming back. You know, I had made that playlist like months earlier, and I was just laying in my bed, and I was like, I'm gonna take all of my favorite Merle Haggard songs, and I'm gonna make a playlist. And so, you know, we know all of his discography so well that like without even listening to him, I could go album by album and just pick the songs that like are just magical. That's what I called the playlist.
Magical
Merle?
Merle? Oh, that sounds like something we would have written on a cassette.
Exactly.
In 10th grade.
And you know what? I never listened to the playlist. And then when we went skiing.
You never listened to that playlist?
I never went back and listened to it. And it's probably been 9 months since I made it. And so when we were coming back down, we skiing with the boys, and then we were driving back that afternoon. I got in the car and I thought of the playlist and I was like, this will be perfect. I'm gonna start playing this thing. And I didn't tell you any of this, but I started playing I said I made this playlist, this Merle playlist. And that's all I said. And I started playing it. And we drove all the way down the mountain, absolutely beautiful sunset coming from Big Bear on the Rim of the World road.
You actually, for those of you in California, you don't come down to 330 to San Bernardino. You stay on the mountain and go past Lake Arrowhead and stay. It's called the Rim of the World.
And if the sun is setting, it's amazing.
It's
and then
like
once the sun sets, you can see like all of Los Angeles. And then when the lights end, that's the coastline. And it was so beautiful. And to me, it was the boys were on their phones or falling asleep in the back, exhausted from skiing. And it was a flashback to when we were in high school and we would just sit there in the car, drive around aimlessly and listen to these Merle mixtapes that we would make for each other. And it was a pristine moment. And, at a certain point, we get down the mountain, you fell asleep a little bit, you wake back up, the playlist is still going. We're not really talking that much, but when we were usually talking about the Merle music, which is what we would do. And it had been so long since we had done that. It was like, I just remember thinking, this is perfect. This is a special friendship moment. And we got back to my house where you had parked and we were gonna part ways. And it was basically the end of the playlist. Like
it was when it got back to like the 60s.
Yeah, well it was, when I was, stuff that I wasn't as interested in. So the playlist came to an end basically. It was perfectly timed for this trip. I didn't even know it. And at the one point where like you woke up and it was still going and we were talking about it and you said, send me this playlist.
But you didn't.
I gotta tell you, I realized at that moment that is my love language.
Making playlists?
Yeah, no, somebody saying unprompted, hey, what is this? And it's happened a couple other times. They're like, what is it? What's this music that you're playing here? I was like, oh, it's a playlist I made. Hey, and then a few days later, get a text. Hey, can you send me that playlist you made? That is my love language.
So you're a DJ?
So yeah, I'm a DJ.
I mean, like really, you missed your calling. You shouldn't be a hairstylist. You should be a DJ.
But the tie to the fact that like without either one of us talking about what I'm saying right now, to me that was your way of saying, hey, this resonated with me. This means something to me too. This took me back. Send me that playlist.
Yeah, because the Merle discography is so big, I just find myself, there's like a couple of albums that I'll bring up on Spotify, and every single playlist that people have made on Spotify sucks because they always put Okie from Muskogee as like the first song.
There's two reasons I haven't sent it to you.
People don't understand Merle Haggard. Like 99% of people who like him don't understand him, is my contention.
But we do. And that's something. It's something special that we had, and that we relived in that moment. So hey, it was a very special moment.
It was very special, but it would be even more special if you would just send me the playlist.
The reason why I didn't send it is because I'm thinking about tweaking the order.
Okay.
But the other reason is,
well, you can tweak the order and just keep sharing it with me. It'll update automatically.
True. I wanted you to ask me again because it made me feel so good when you asked me.
Yeah, that's a little selfish.
Yeah, it was.
That's a little selfish.
All right, I'll send it to you. And you know what? I will also share it with you. I will tweet it out. So go to my Twitter. It'll lead you to my Spotify. I'll tweet it out. And then if it changes over time, it's because I'm optimizing it.
Yeah.
Magical Merle.
Number 6? right?
Yeah. What's your number 6?
Number 6 is Flight of the Conchords.
Oh, I didn't think about them.
Really?
Yes. Okay. This is great. Glad you did.
Okay, so if you're not familiar with Flight of the Conchords, I'm sorry. But this is Brett and Jermaine. Jermaine Clement, who lots of people call him Jermaine Clement, but it's Jermaine Clement, which I guess is a Kiwi name.
Yeah.
So these are New Zealanders that are kind of in the, Jermaine has gone on to become an actor that you would recognize from many different movies. You might recognize Brett from Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring as an elf, but just as a very brief.
I mean, he won an Oscar for writing the music for the Muppet.
The Muppet movie, yeah. So he's kind of gone into the songwriting thing, and I think Jermaine is more doing the acting thing and producing.
Jermaine is a co-creator of
What We Do in the Shadows. So Jermaine was in What We Do in the Shadows. And so he's collaborating with Taika Waititi, who didn't make my list, but is an honorable mention.
Oh, yes.
I love Taika, but he's more of a recent influence, and I only know about him through Jermaine. So,
and that comedic tone, that Kiwi tone, is something it just blew us away.
It just is like nectar into my mouth.
But
man.
obviously,
I just love it.
Yeah. So What We Do in the Shadows is probably my favorite television show, comedy.
Yeah.
Currently.
Right. But the specific thing, so Flight of the Conchords is the 2-man band that Brett and Jermaine formed probably right around the time that we were coming up and trying to get our comedy going. I specifically remember
2000s. MySpace?
Well, no, I remember being on a trip, a Campus Crusade for Christ trip that we were going on, like probably 2002, 2003, where we're traveling around doing our little comedy show that's really just an evangelism training seminar for Christian students.
But we have funny songs.
We had a lot of funny songs.
Weren't nearly as funny as these two guys.
Well, and I remember being in a hotel room.
Yes, I remember this.
Turning on HBO, and all of a sudden there's these two dudes singing.
It's a stand-up special, but it's two guys on a stage and they're singing
Business
songs.
Time is probably the first one, which is a song about having married sex, and it's incredible. And I was just immediately like, oh gosh, these guys are so much funnier than us.
It's like I was shot in the gut.
Yeah, this has happened so many times in my life where I feel like I'm doing something, and then I see somebody who's actually doing what I think I'm doing, and then I see it happening. I'm like, damn it, I'm not doing it. I'm not actually that good at this.
Yes, when we looked at each other and almost thought we had to turn it off. We didn't turn it off. We watched the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then
I hated them. I love hating them.
We just couldn't talk. We couldn't talk about it because they were so good. But it wasn't inspiring. It was challenging.
It was infuriating.
It was sobering.
Yeah, and I would say that every effort that we've made in musical comedy over the years has been an effort to emulate them on some level without completely biting what they're doing, what they did.
Every line has a comedic effect. There's no filler, and they each have a character.
Yeah.
And so that we were students of what they did, and this was all before the HBO series came out that was an adaptation of their first album.
Yeah. Which had like a music video. It's
obviously
the reason
influenced Buddy System.
It's the reason that Buddy System has a music video in every single episode. But the thing I'll say
we
is
actually went in we calculated our comedy songs like as we were developing an audience on
as
YouTube.
Visuals.
That, and we specifically talked about how not to be compared to them by doing things differently. So we wouldn't just seem like a hack ripoff.
Basically just avoiding like guitar, funky, white boy music kind of thing,
or Kiwi accents.
Yeah.
I have a recurring dream of meeting one or both of them over the years, and it's like it's an anxiety dream.
Oh yeah, because they don't know who we are.
but
the thing is that I when I listen to our music, and again, we don't do a lot of comedy music anymore. It's like there's only two of us, and they don't do it anymore, really. I mean, they're doing it individually, but when I listen to our music, anything that we've created, I always find fault with it. And this is any artist, I guess, but like I listen to our music and I'm like, yeah, I'd love to rewrite that right now. Oh, I'd love to make that actually funny.
Right.
But I always, in my mind, I'm never not comparing it to what they did.
The moment of discovery of that special with like no point of reference at all.
Yeah,
we turned it on.
It just was on HBO. Okay.
Two guys sitting on stools playing music, doing the exact same thing we were doing. I was like, whoa, what's happening here? It was really surreal.
Yeah.
My number 6 is David Letterman. Oh. So what number did you put David Letterman? Because I know you put Letterman on your list.
Number 1.
Oh, I stole your number 1.
I knew you would. I knew this was gonna happen. I knew he would be on your list, and I knew that he wouldn't be number 1.
All right, say what you will. I think he's more of an. I think you watched more Letterman than me. You stayed up later than I did.
Well, I still do.
And you watched more Letterman.
Okay, so again, this was a struggle because David Letterman is not an artist in the strict sense, right? He's a late night show host. But this for me is kind of embracing.
I don't know. I disagree with what you just said, but go ahead.
Well, no. I'm saying that I do believe that it's an art, but what I'm saying is that it's not a traditional artist category. It's not a musician, it's not a filmmaker, it's not a TV showrunner, it's not a writer.
Okay,
it's a guy, it's a personality. But the reason that he's my number 1 is because in the same way that my dad sort of serves as this foundational influence as the things that I find funny and the way that I end up being funny naturally is very influenced by the disposition of a guy like David Letterman. I've actually come off of that quite a bit in the past probably 5 or 6 years, just as people's taste in comedy has changed.
So the dry, he had a dry delivery and it was kind of a knowing slyness to it.
Well, and most people, if you're younger and your only experience with Letterman is the CBS days, and specifically like the last 3 to 4 years, you would just be like, this is an angry guy. This is a guy who's not happy, who's kind of mean, doesn't seem to like anyone, doesn't seem to like himself.
Yeah.
I think that's how the younger generation responds to it. And if you look at some of the way that I kind of behaved in some of our earlier content, you might come to the same conclusion. It was a calculated thing. I was like, this is the role that I'm playing. And as I realized that a lot of people who enjoy internet content are not into that, they don't want to see somebody, they don't like meanness and they don't even really like slyness as much. So I'm a lot more jovial of a guy in terms of my comedy at this point.
But if you go back to his earlier stuff.
Well, he was kind of like that. He was that way. But the reason he's my number 1.
He was smilier and he was silly too.
Super silly.
It was a strange combination of silly and dry.
Yeah, well, the reason he's my number 1 is because for better or worse, the thing that we are and I am most known for is being one of the 2 hosts of Good Mythical Morning. Again, at the end of my life, the thing that will have had the most impact in the entertainment world will be all these episodes of Good Mythical Morning that I've made. And I approach the way that we think about that show and the way that we embrace both some kind of structure that is presentational, that feels kind of traditional, that feels like a television show in a way that a lot of YouTube content doesn't feel.
Yeah.
That's a huge part of Good Mythical Morning's consistency, reliability, and sort of point of view. But the other piece of it is this unhinged, completely silliness, just a embrace of silliness to the point that it gets weird.
He did a segment called Will It Float? And it was just taking an object.
Yeah, he did.
Putting it in water and then describing if it was floating or not.
Yeah, and he incorporated his mom into his content. The reason that we have our parents in our content in that way, he would call his mom and talk to her on the phone.
Yeah,
he did these. If you go back and look at the bits, now there's a really good book about this.
Yeah, can you Google the Letterman biography? Because we read it, we got Stevie to read it. It was like it reminded us stuff I had actually never seen, but like the ethos of Good Mythical Morning is much more like the early and successful Letterman Late Show than it is Wayne's World. I will say that. Wayne's World not on our list.
Oh yeah.
And you kind of fell in more to that Letterman thing. Just tell us when you got but for me, I think of you as more of a Letterman type, and then I kind of like, my comedic sensibility, I don't know who that is. I think I can see more of Letterman and your dad and you. I actually have a hard time seeing, and I don't have anybody on my list that's like that version for me. Don't say Paul Schaefer. Don't say, that was a joke. I knew you wouldn't say that. Don't say Don Knotts.
I mean, I do think that like Dana Carvey is a type, not just because you look like him, but I think there is a, is that it?
Yeah, Letterman, the last guard of.
The Last Giant.
Last Giant.
The Last Giant of late night.
Yeah.
And if I recall, this book is also pretty honest. You know, he's a complex character. He did a lot of things that he regrets. That obviously I do not endorse everything that he did as a person or even everything that he did comedically. But I watched so much Letterman with Ben Greenwood growing up. Ben Greenwood and I, and Ben Greenwood, again, I guess in some senses Ben should be on the list because Ben was the one that was really into late night TV. My dad was not into late night TV. My dad was not into that kind of comedy.
Yeah.
He also didn't stay up that late. But Ben would be like, we're gonna watch Johnny Carson. And he's like, and when we really want something really silly, we're gonna watch Letterman. And we watched Letterman on NBC. You know, the dude was sitting there with his curly hair.
The Late Late Show or whatever it was called.
Tennis shoes. And he would just watching an adult do such stupid stuff. It's really made us who we are in a lot of ways.
The parallels, from the book, he was a weatherman and he like had this, and then he moved into being a comedian and
he took a circuitous path to entertainment.
Just like we did. He had an interesting relationship. Well, he had a relationship with his producer. Like they were together for years. And she's very instrumental in the book too. So it's like that's an interesting thing that there's like a Stevie as producer kind of thing.
But not as a relationship.
Not as a relationship though. But like there were entire episodes where she would trick him. Like it would be a joke on Letterman. Like he would
get mad.
Yeah, he would get mad. Yeah. But it would be live to tape. So there's a lot of stories there that were like we related to and that make that very formative. So I don't know if I accept the Dana Carvey. I know I look like him and there is a tone, but he's a character actor.
I think I'm just talking about the
he never played himself.
You're not gonna like I'm not the word zany, right? You don't like the word zany. But if you're like, okay, this guy or this guy, who's the zanier one?
Well, it's like,
you know what I'm saying? People are gonna pick you.
If there's the dry and then there's if the opposite's wet. It's like, okay, I'm the wet guy, you're the dry guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's but I don't know exactly. I'm curious, you know. You can hashtag your biscuits. Let us both know who else. I think if you're a student of comedy,
I think there's a big
beyond just who I look like.
There's a distinction, and
who Rhett reminds you of.
Again, this is an oversimplification, but the thing that we say quite a bit is that I'm usually funny on purpose, and you're usually funny on accident. Now that's an oversimplification because a lot of your accidental humor is purposeful.
It's a different mode.
You don't know what's going to come out of your mouth. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, but you go into a sort of like a trance-like state. I mean, Good Mythical Evening obviously is the perfect example of this. But it's like
it wasn't a trance, but yeah,
it's more chaotic.
Yeah,
you know, it's chaotic, which is great.
Maybe and that makes me think of a Martin Short, but I didn't watch a lot of Martin Short. You know, so it's not. I'm not actively emulating somebody, and I can't identify.
Well, actually, that's really good because if you watch Only Murders in the Building, which I did, and I enjoyed it. Not my favorite, but I enjoyed it. I am the Steve Martin, you are the Martin Short.
Right.
All day long, without a doubt. You know, if you have to put us into that duo, that's how it tracks.
I think that works.
You know?
Yeah, I think that works. But we're still open to others. Hashtag your biscuits. Sorry to steal your number one.
Yeah, that hurts. Just like that playlist.
My number, so now we need your number 6. No, your number 5.
My number 5, you already stole that as well, Ross McElwee.
Okay, my number 5 is Seinfeld.
That's my number 2.
Oh God. Okay. Yeah, and you know,
I'm really interested what your top 3 are gonna be now.
For Seinfeld, I just boiled it down to like the relatable observational humor is something that became a cornerstone of
anything we write.
What we would build to connect on YouTube. But it was instinctual because we were so obsessed with that show.
I actually put Seinfeld / Larry David as one thing, right?
Yeah, you got to.
So, because Larry David was the one that was really fueling the writing of all that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, obviously Seinfeld was very much, it was coming from his stand-up, which was super observational. What's the deal with this? But bringing it into the real world and into a real conversation, Larry David is a genius at that, and obviously he does it. It's on display in Curb Your Enthusiasm, which I love as well. It's yeah. I think the thing that
he's the George Costanza character in Seinfeld.
The thing that it so resonates with me as a writer, right? And that's why I put them at number 2, because if I start thinking about you got these 2 people in this scene and we need to accomplish this plot-wise, but they need to get there in an entertaining way. So they need to be having a conversation about this. Well,
right.
The way that Larry David sees conversational humor is it's the same thing that it comes from this tendency that's in both of us, which is, hey, we just hung out with you were just talking about it on the last podcast. We just hung out with this guy. Let's talk about that hat.
Let's pick him.
Let's talk about the hat he had on.
Right.
Did you see what he was doing? Did you see what he was doing with his left hand and his nose?
Yeah.
Explain that to me.
Right. And it's nothing in Seinfeld. There were no jokes. It was not joke oriented. It was conceptual.
Right.
Conversational.
Yeah.
And so it very much is how we like to write.
And it gets very specific. And it's like, oh, you typically wouldn't think that we should be having a conversation about this, or this is where the humor should be coming from. It feels like, I don't even know how to articulate it very well, but when I watch, and the only way I really watch Curb Your Enthusiasm these days is like on TikTok. I hate to say it, you know.
Oh, I gotta get
a
in
clip.
on that.
A clip will just come up, whether it's on the Curb Your Enthusiasm actual account or just somebody has reposted it, and I'm just like, this moment where something happens, and I'm just like, man, this is like, so that's so great.
So that's your number 2.
Yeah, you've taken my 1 and my 2 away
What's
from
your
me.
4?
Coen Brothers.
What we were just talking about made me realize that they weren't on my list, but yeah.
The Coen Brothers are not on your list?
I just forgot. But yeah, it's that same thing. It's a different, it's character-driven comedy, which we've talked about before, is another big part of like finding ourselves really loving their comedy and then trying to figure out why and having conversations about it.
There's so much about the Coen Brothers I can say. One, they're a partnership, right? Which is obviously very relatable to us. There's a creative evolution over the course of their career of them like trying something, and you see these like glimmers of it, and like Blood Simple, in which we kind of went into our like Coen Brothers like film study kind of our version of that. Like, let's go watch Blood Simple and make ourselves like it, right?
Yeah,
you know, and then you get what I think is for me. Maybe for you is just the quintessential perfect expression of them as filmmakers as Oh Brother. You know, that's where it gets into this thing that is the humor, the music, the characters, everything just lines up in a way that and they basically just hit it out of the park every time now as far as I'm concerned. I mean, there's a couple times where I'm not quite as into the subject matter. Or I don't quite relate as much.
But we talked about this on the our top 10 films.
Yeah.
It's kind of there's that overlap there.
But it's just they're so aspirational because they do what they do so well. And I think again, underneath everything that we've accomplished has always been this desire to make movies. And I still want to do it. And yes, we have written one. And I just don't think I'm ever going to let go of that desire to be a filmmaker, not instead of or in place of what we do, but in addition to what we do, because there's just something about the way that you can bring all this creative energy into a time and place over the course of a couple of hours, and you can get it done in a year or whatever, from start to finish. There's just something so attractive about that process. And when I think about how that's ultimately sort of the white whale for me personally, of like that's what I'm always chasing, is I want to make that movie. They are the embodiment of it having been done perfectly.
My number 4 wouldn't have been on my list, except that like in a recent conversation, I was reminded of him. John Boy and Billy Big Show.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought about them for a second, and
because
I didn't put them on.
Like in high school, we were listening to their morning show, still going to this day. But it was, they were a duo that they were radio personalities, so it was conversational, and you'd be with them for like, for summer, like on the job with my dad, like painting houses. We would listen to it in the truck. We'd listen to it while we were painting. I would listen to the whole 3 hours every single weekday. And, they'd come back from commercial and say, all right, we're gonna call so-and-so, and it would be they would have sketches where it was like they were playing different characters. But it's like, you had this keen awareness. Well, I don't know if I knew it first, but eventually I wised up. I was like,
they were playing all the
these two guys are beating everybody. These people aren't calling in. I'd have comedians come in and guest, but they had their own world it was like self-contained.
Yeah.
And you became a part of it, and like you got to know them as people. And I think that we have this understanding of the audience experience for Good Mythical Morning and for this show because we had that experience with them. That's why it was so thrilling when they, like I said, they invited us to, once we started making those viral videos,
we got to be on the show.
The commercials, we got to be on the show. And I took my dad there, and John Boy took us to his ranch, his like farmhouse, and like we hung out and stayed the night.
I actually got a text from Carl.
Carl the cook?
Yeah, he went to my old
the guy who made their barbecue sauce.
Yeah, he said, "I'll send y'all some barbecue sauce."
The guy who got drunk and said, "Man, has anybody ever told you look like a falcon?"
Yeah,
your face looked like a falcon.
I couldn't figure out how to get in touch with him because
falcon, man.
It went to my like Google number, and it's like I couldn't. But we got to get in touch with him. I mean, the more you talk about it, the more I realize.
All the character work, the sketch work.
So much of that influence.
And it was audio. It was like what we did as kids. We would do do radio shows, stuff on tapes.
It really influenced a lot of the characters that we created in the early days.
The redneck characters.
Redneck guys,
which we've had like all different, we've had an array of them.
Yeah, and when you talk about just the amount
Y'all keep them straight up there.
Actual exposure to a potential influence.
Right.
That's what you did. You turned on John Boy and Billy on the way to high school every single day.
Yeah, so it's like we absorbed their sensibilities.
Yeah.
And we got to know them as real people too. So you saw both sides of it. All right, I think I've wiped you out.
No, I have one more, my number 3.
All right, what's your number 3?
I think I know someone that's in your top 3 that is on my honorable mentions, but I'll let you say it. But my number 3 is Weird Al.
Okay. Weird Al is my number 2.
Okay. So you get to talk about him first.
I regret when Weird Al came on Good Mythical Morning that we didn't like
worship him.
I know, worship him.
Yeah, give him offerings.
And like
give him some like a burnt offering.
The first cassette tape we both ever owned was Weird Al. And I still have mine. I wish I would have brought it that day and had him sign it. We should have him back on the show.
We should.
We should.
That was during GMM 22 where it was so hectic that it was like, oh, Weird Al's here? I don't even have time to process that. Yeah. He's playing his accordion on the show? Yeah, but there's also like a woman who looks like a stripper. It
was a strange episode.
What was,
It wasn't all about him, and it was a disservice to the great Weird Al, number 2 creative influence on my list. Because I got engaged with this comedy music and it just like made the most sense. Like I wasn't even a music fan before that, really.
Yeah.
Like I was because my older stepsister liked music and I wasn't gonna like anything she liked. Until Weird Al.
She boxed you out of music.
I was like, he is so, this just totally makes sense.
Yeah, it was like it was tailor-made for us.
And it's strange that like, I didn't own every one of his albums. I didn't watch his movie. So it wasn't like I was a super fan, but at such a formative time in our lives when we were like really hitting it off and like making those dumb tapes that we were making, we weren't writing songs together yet, but it was just like, that stuff, it's foundational, in terms of comedy, and obviously starting our career as musical comedians for the most part.
And one of the first things, really, apart from some of the things that we did in high school, and then a couple of the videos that we made in college, the first thing that we did together as a comedic duo was comedy music.
Yeah.
It was those first couple of Christmas conferences.
Oh no, I'm talking about like You're Down with Halloween, like rewriting the words.
Yeah, that's true.
Rewriting the words and getting up on stage at the fall festival.
But anytime that we were performing, so we did it there. We did it in middle school. But then in college, performing at those Campus Crusade things, it was just like, all right, we're gonna get up there and we're gonna do this funny song about the unibrow or whatever together. And it was our voices kind of went into a sort of nasally Weird Al place that
kind of nerdy.
People talk about, so a lot of our early stuff sounds very Weird Al-y.
Yeah.
And that was, it was because we had listened to so much Weird Al. It was in our bones.
Okay, so that was my number 2. That was your.
So now, I've taken you've already taken my 2, this Seinfeld, Larry David, and 1 Letterman.
All right, so I gotta clean it up. My number 3.
You have 3 more?
I have 2 more because Weird Al's my number 2.
Oh.
My number 3, I put Questlove. Like, I'm a huge fan of Questlove. And he's a huge creative inspiration that is within the last 2 years, addition to my list. Of course, he's a hip hop icon as a member and drummer for The Roots. He's a band leader for Fallon, which is The Roots on Fallon. But in terms of like me, you talk about me wanting to be a DJ and telling that story, like it's a product of like me connecting. You're like looking at me like you're like shocked or something.
No, I'm interested to hear this. Because I would not have guessed this.
Just really identifying the like how much I enjoy music on like an appreciation level. Mm-hmm. Of course, with our Merle Haggard obsession, like way back in the day, I remember I went to Heather Wilson's house and her dad had a magazine it was a country music heritage magazine. And it like talked about like the best country music albums. And I was like, I remember thinking then, I took the magazine. I still have it. So like back in high school, it was something I was very passionate about country music as a offshoot of our passion for Merle Haggard. But like I go to 11 when it comes to like the collection mentality and like the wiki mentality of understanding everything about country music. And I started to think I could become a country music museum curator. Like maybe that can be something I'll do. I remember thinking about it. That's why I kept that magazine all these years and still have it. And then it was over the pandemic, there was like a rekindling of that, which led to like the listening party broadcast that I did with Britain and stuff like that. But it was a result of like me starting to watch Questlove's broadcasts on Instagram where he would like do DJ sets and he would start talking about the music that he was playing. And it was like, I mean, he has an encyclopedic knowledge of all these things. I'm not a fan of the Roots. I've never listened to the Roots. I'm a fan of him in the way
they did back us up while we did our Get Down with Halloween rap.
Yes,
on
we
Fallon.
did. Which is
we've been backed by the Roots on
which was huge.
Before.
I mean, that was a career and friendship high point for us. But like the fact that he branches out into in middle age, he's like 5 years older than us. But he's using everything from his career to now to capitalize and do the things that he's passionate about. So he's writing books. He wrote a book about creativity called Creative Quest, which I've read some of. He executive produces a hip hop documentary on an AMC called the Songs That Shook, which is amazing. And now he's nominated for an Oscar for Best Documentary Film for Summer of Soul, which is it's like the Black Woodstock, basically, that was the footage was never released. And he's nominated for an Oscar for it, and he deserves it. And it's, so the way that he's branching out and engaging everything that up from a career standpoint up to this point that like he's leveraging is cool to see. And so it's very encouraging that like we talk about the things we want to do like you were doing earlier. And it's, I see a guy like him that's like he's an elder statesman of music.
And he hasn't, he doesn't just do one thing.
He doesn't just do one thing.
He does a lot of things.
So when we think about our legacy and we think about the things that we have yet to do, those are two different things. But they interplay. And it's so even if it's something like us investing in the next generation of creators with our Mythical Creator Accelerator, it's just another example of, hey, we're gonna pay it forward, and but we're still here for it.
Oh yeah,
we're not retiring.
Still a lot to do.
So yeah.
Well,
and
Questlove,
met him. We met him once.
If I'd have known that you felt that way about Questlove when he was playing the drums for us rapping, I would have probably been more nervous.
I came to grips with it afterward. I wasn't as
okay, it was after.
Yeah, because it was more pandemic related. All right, so I just have my number one, which is for both of us. You don't have any left.
Yeah, but I mean, you want me to guess who it is?
Yeah.
Is it Wes Anderson?
No, I went in a totally different direction.
Because I was like, he was an honorable mention, but I was like, Link loves Wes Anderson so much as you can put him number one. But I was like, but as your list goes on, I'm like, that can't be number one.
Okay, and this is for both of us. You're not gonna disagree with this because again, with everything we've talked about, my number one, I'm putting Benny Enzor.
Whoa!
Yes, baby.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. I mean, it just didn't cross my mind.
But now that I've said it, it totally makes sense, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Maybe you've heard his name. Maybe you know from the Book of Mythicality us talking about him, or all the times we talked about our high school band, the Wax Paper Dogs, ending in a Z. It was the 90s. Mm-hmm. So Matt Enzor was in our grade. His younger brother John was 1 year younger, but their dad, Benny, he played the piano at the church that we went to. We always knew him growing up. He was one of the youth leaders, and also a dad.
Coach.
He was a soccer coach. When my mom got divorced and me and her moved into our own place, just the two of us, it was across the street from the Enzors, which they still live over there. So it's like in this small community, he was very present at church, at soccer, in the community.
And then at school later on.
That's right. And then he worked. He was like the guy who in charge of the detention.
Which I had to go to one
at the high school.
I had to go to detention, and the guy in charge of it was my keyboard player.
So it's like Benny and Zor started through the church. He started a cafe for the like a coffee shop for.
Yeah, this is this is true. I didn't
so
think
pivotal.
about it, but now that you're putting it all together, yes.
Because I know we didn't. Besides your dad, we didn't think of it in terms of interpersonal relationships. We talked about it in terms of like external celebrity influences. But yeah, he started the Maranatha Cafe coffee shop to have Campbell University students could hang out, and it was a way for the church to create a safe space for them to hang out, listen to music. There was an open mic night, which then we as high school students involved in the church, we helped facilitate, move chairs around. We helped renovate the building and decorate it. And Benny was a huge music fan and musician. He's a great pianist, also played guitar.
Yep.
And huge Allman Brothers fan and so he was a hippie. He kind of, he had a hippie vibe. He had longer, shaggy hair. He didn't look like any of our other parents.
Or a Fu Manchu.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he would, he took all of his old records, and then we decorated the Maranatha Cafe with all of his records. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't Christian music. It was like 70s albums, wall to wall. That became the wallpaper. It was like super cool.
Yeah.
And it was his baby. And
because of course it was because of the
open mic night,
the fact that the Maranatha Cafe existed and there was this open mic night, that was what gave us the courage or the opportunity. We didn't need the courage, the opportunity to be like, well, of course we're going to perform at the open mic night. And that was when Eric Woodruff had a guitar. And he could play the guitar.
John Enzor had a bass. He was learning bass guitar.
He was definitely learning. And of course, Eric was learning too, but he was the most proficient at the time.
Yeah.
And I remember the first song we ever wrote was about ironically, given specifically my deconstruction story, was about creation. And it was basically about how creation proves that God exists.
And that it happened in 7 days.
Yeah. And it made fun of the organic soup and life, spontaneous life. But we
had to write Christian.
It was horrible.
We had to write Christian songs because to play the open mic night, you did have to play Christian music. It was a Christian cafe.
But that's where Benny comes in, because Benny listened to our creation song and was like, boys, if you're really serious about playing music, you should probably learn how to play cover songs. Like you should learn how to play other songs that have been written. And he was also like, and I've got some old songs that I wrote like 20 years ago that you could also play. And so that was the beginning of us, because again, most people who sit down, even if you listen to music a lot, you sit down to write a song, even if you can play a few chords, you don't understand song structure. You don't understand like, oh, there's this number of measures in the verse, and then there's a bridge and there's a chorus, and like there's a structure that it follows. If you just start writing, you have no idea. Benny saw that immediately and then was like, here's some songs. Like, hey, can you just, what if you just played I Can See Clearly Now, The Rain Is Gone?
Yeah.
Or Country Roads.
By John Denver.
And that's how we learned how to sing, and that's how I learned how to play the guitar, because it's,
But he also said, and I can also be in the band to help you actually make this into a band.
To keep the beat.
I'll play, I'll play keyboard, and like if you need a beat, there'll be a beat on my keyboard. We didn't have a drummer yet.
Early in the day, right?
And we started writing songs. He brought out, he had all these songs that he had written in the 70s, like handwritten, and he like taught them to us, and we sang them.
Yeah.
And it was like Allman Brothers meets John Denver, sung by two guys who were trying to sound like Hank Williams Jr.
Right, it was a train wreck.
I think there's a whole other podcast just about wax paper dogs, but I just want to say that like we threw ourselves into this band, and because there was an adult in the room who we considered it was like he was a peer. he was John, Matt did our sound and did all the tech stuff, but we were a group of peers and he didn't elevate himself above us. And we had so much fun. We threw ourselves into it. We committed so wholeheartedly to it. And there's something about being in a band that really helps you develop creatively. We were making thousands of creative decisions in every time we would get together.
Yeah.
And so you start to learn to work with 4 other people.
And you learn to trust yourself creatively.
You learn to put yourself out there.
Because what ended up happening is within that first year, we went from an older guy giving us his music and having the drums be on the keyboard to me and you sitting in a room somewhere writing a song.
And we started writing.
We would have never had the courage to do that without his influence.
You and I were writing music for the Wax Paper Dogs together, writing music and lyrics. And then the other thing we were doing is we were making them a little funny. Like they all had to be like veiled. Some of them were like overt Christian, and some of them were veiled. And some of them started to get funny, and that's where
the only surviving recording actually is funny, a little bit funny. It's a racial reconciliation song.
Yeah,
but it has a reference to a professional wrestler.
Right. So, I mean, we can get into all this in more detail later, but for now, just like we did in the Book of Mythicality, we're like giving throwback thanks to Benny because in a lot of ways, I don't think we would be here because as creators, he really fanned that flame and gave us a sense of identity as creative people that translated into what we wore, what the music we listened to. By the time we went off to college, we had fully embraced like the 90s alternative thing, unlike anybody in our high school and unlike anybody we associated with in college. So it wasn't just an artistic thing, it was a complete identity.
It set up our personalities in some ways of always feeling like we didn't quite fit, but kind of taking a little bit of pride in that, I think, to be transparent about it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think Benny will be, I texted with John not too long ago, so I'll let him know that Benny gets the shout out in this one.
Okay. Love you, Benny.
Now, okay. We went ahead and talked ahead of time about one thing. We didn't give any heads up of who was gonna be on our list, but the thing that we had a conversation about was that if this list was in fact factual,
right,
that we would be each other's number one.
Right.
Because
so we can be each other's 0.
So we'll be each other's 0. We obviously, the most significant creative influence that is embodied in a person in each of our lives is each other, because we don't do any creativity for the most part where we're not directly consulting with one another, and it's a product of our collective imagination.
Yeah, and I'll also give a shout out to Stevie.
Yeah,
in terms of it's like she's become a creative soundboard for us that like we hatch things, and then we always know that there's like the next phase is getting Stevie's buy-in and like her applying her filters to and first reaction to the next thing we're hatching.
Yeah, Stevie has been,
and then obviously shaping creatively everything you see at Mythical that we're involved in or not.
She's the first filter besides each other.
Yeah,
for everything we do.
Yeah,
I want to shout out Jessie, my wife, as well. I tend to discuss.
I love that we're using the term shout out.
Well, we're bringing it back. I want to give heartbeat props to my wife, because I very rarely think about anything creatively that I don't consult her about. Anything that I write, I give to her when I'm done. And if I get stuck creatively, a lot of times, because I do a lot of stuff at home too. I do a lot of writing at home because I don't have enough time to do it at work. So she's been a huge influence. And also, go back to the fact that both of our wives were the ones who sort of encouraged us to make a creative thing our profession back in the day. So
absolutely. But yeah, and I was saying, so we'll make each other our 0 on the list, which sounds bad, but I think it's good because there's not at every single point. I surprised you with the Questlove thing, but basically there's so much overlap. It's 99.9% creative overlap over so many years that like we touch so much that even the things that we don't touch in the other person's creative endeavors, the presence will be felt.
Well, which is why you'll probably relate to, I'm just gonna quickly run through the honorable mentions, the ones that were in the initial batch but then got pushed off. Wes Anderson.
Okay.
Spike Jonze. Quentin Tarantino. Rob Reiner. Donald Glover.
Yeah.
Errol Morris, as I said. The Lonely Island.
Yeah.
Taika Waititi. Robert Rodriguez. The Duplass brothers.
Oh, okay.
Will Smith.
Yeah.
And Werner Herzog.
Okay. All right, well, let's wrap this thing up. This has been a long one. So I guess I stole your rec.
Yeah.
Sherman's March.
But so let's just make this a double rec because we mentioned two things that are really good. The first thing is Ross McElwee's, which it looks like McElwee, MCELWEE. Sherman's March, great documentary. I'm sure you can get it on Amazon or whatever. And then that Letterman book, The Last Giant of Late Night. I think if you're in a creative profession and you're just trying to figure out how to like define yourself creatively, or you've got a creative endeavor that you're currently in the middle of, I think that can be a pretty inspirational book. David Letterman, The Last Giant of Late Night. All
right, it's been a fun one. Hopefully you're inspired, your creative juices are flowing.
Tell us who your creative influences are, #earbiscuits.
To watch more Ear Biscuits, click on the playlist on the right.
To watch the previous episode of Ear Biscuits, click on the playlist to the left.
And don't forget to click on the circular icon to subscribe.
If you prefer to listen to this podcast, it's available on all your favorite podcast platforms. Thanks for being your mythical best.